Okay, so we can look at a couple of items. So this is what we are going to look at in this first chapter, probably the first half of it in this class. Yeah? So we have some objectives here, and we will probably dive into the components of InfoSec, or information system security in general. Yeah? But before we look at these components, now that you've done some introductory elements of security before, I believe you've covered something in cryptography and network security. Yes? So what is information system security?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
This is probably the process involved in keeping information confidential and available.
Confidential and available. Victor, yes. Your hand was up.
No.
Another Victor, Miranga.
Yes, my hand was up.
Yes, what do you think?
I think the procedures or the set rules that govern how information is exchanged in a system.
Exchanged in a system, okay. So information system security is an aspect of what you guys have mentioned, but the idea is to try and not just secure information. Let's think of it as securing information in transit and in storage as well, yeah? Which means we have to look at security from not just the information point of view, but also the processes that access the information. The devices that store the information, the devices that encode the information. Yeah? We also look at other aspects such as the network and surfaces through which we can access this information, or surfaces through which processes can manipulate the information. Okay? So the idea is to look at security from a holistic point of view, and that is from all the elements that will be involved in an information system. Yeah? And one of the most important elements that we always miss out is the users, the human element. Yeah? So from your previous units, you can always interject if I am making the wrong assumption. You have looked at the most important elements. Yeah, you've looked at the CIA triad. You've looked at other additional elements that define security, define what is desirable in terms of security in any system. Yeah. So you've looked at the CIA triad, I am sure, have you? Yes, Mumbani.
Yeah, we have looked at the CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
And availability. So what do we mean when we say confidentiality, or when we mention confidentiality?
Basically, confidentiality is you access only the information that you have the right to access to.
Okay. So we have confidentiality as restricting access to information or data, yeah, or processes that manipulate the data. Yeah? So when you look at confidentiality, in most cases there are two distinct elements in confidentiality. The two distinct elements will be the confidentiality of data itself, making sure that only authorized individuals can access the data. And the second bit is who has the privileges, who has the authority to define who can access data, yeah? Which is what, at this point in time, is referred to as privacy. A person who has control over who accesses the information, who defines who accesses the information, or who is authorized to access the information. So you can look at confidentiality from those two perspectives. Hiding the information, and two, who defines who the information is hidden from. So we have the data confidentiality and the privacy element. Then we have integrity, which refers to what? What does integrity refer to? Isaac Motanya.
Yes. Okay. Integrity for me refers to maintaining consistency, accuracy, and trustworthiness of data over its entire life cycle.
Okay.
So it must not really change in transit. Yeah, and also it covers issues like file permissions and access control.
And access control.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is, according to you, do you think that is an objective point of view?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So integrity is about who can modify the information. Sometimes who can get rid of the information. Now, integrity has different perspectives. You can look at integrity from one, has this data been modified? Who did the modification? You can also look at integrity from a process or a system point of view, where you focus on is the system working in a manner that is correct, that is expected, or that is defined in the specification point of the application or the system. So are the processes probably accessing data or executing commands in the order that should be the case. We can also look at it from who the source of information is. Is the source of information an authentic source of information, or an authentic or an authoritative source of that particular set of information? So when you look at the integrity, we can have different mechanisms, as Isaac says, to ensure that we have this data integrity. So we can have mechanisms that focus on prevention of loss of integrity, which generally looks at or tries to make sure that there is no one who's going to change the data. So we have restrictions in terms of who can change, delete the data. We can also have mechanisms that detect the change. So they don't really do a lot. They just categorize the data as either trustworthy or not. So if you've had any changes that are unauthorized, then the detection mechanisms will generally categorize this data set as either trustworthy or not. And finally, we have availability, which is what? Maureen Kagema.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
But what was the question?
We are looking at the CIA triad, and we are looking at availability. So what do we mean when we say we need availability as part of the most integral components of security?
I think
Okay.
that availability is the actual availability of your data.
Okay.
Um, um, I think it includes like the authentication mechanisms,
Okay.
and systems that are designed to be able to have things such as what's the word? Things such as when things such as hardware failures occurs,
Okay.
some systems could help. I'm not so sure.
Okay. You can take a few minutes and regather your thoughts.
Okay.
Tangus, what do you think availability is? Yes, Aubrey.
Okay, so I think with regards to data, those who are authorized to access the data should be able to do so at a given point in time.
Okay. At any given point in time, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Kesley.
Okay. I'll use an illustration. Like in cloud computing, where a server is down, you're still able to access your data throughout any server. Like basically, if one server is down, it'll be redirected to another one. So you're basically given access to that data at any given location or any given point in like a correct format.
Okay. I'm not saying that your description is wrong, but in that case, what will be the difference between availability and redundancy?
Okay, from what I understand, redundancy is like in terms of it being in the same format, but being hosted in different location or something like that.
Okay.
But availability, meaning you have access to it at any given time or any given location.
All right. Okay, fair enough. Yes, Reb, please use your official name. Yeah?
Okay, I think availability is basically ensuring that the people who are supposed to get the data, the authorized users or the target users, can actually access it, such that we avoid things like DOS and DDoS attacks, where like people who actually don't really care about the data or who it doesn't aim to flood the system and the authorized people can't access the system. So I think, in my opinion, that's what availability means. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. There was a hand up. Is it Amani?
Oh yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
For me, availability means having the data accessible at any point in time, and having like a backup to ensure that in case the original servers fail, there's no downtime in terms of accessing information by the people using the servers. Redundancy on the other hand, is I think having multiple iterations of the same data, maybe in the same server or in different servers. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So yes, availability is focusing on users, authorized users, being able to access the data at any given point in time. Yeah. So availability focuses on users being able to access the data. Authorized users. Yeah. Now, when you look at availability, from a high-level point of view, we could have maybe an organizational policy or an SLA, service level agreement with a service provider, probably a cloud-based service provider, to have, say, 99.99% availability. Yeah? Now, that is what is defined in the policy document, the SLA, but we could have different mechanisms or procedures or tools in place to ensure that we have this availability. Yeah? So we could have redundancy as one of the measures to ensure availability. So there are a couple of concepts that always come up and they revolve around availability. Some of them include maybe the capacity of the system. Yeah? For example, I realized we have telecom students as well. When you look at, say, bandwidth planning, yeah, you have to look at what is, other than what is the theoretical capacity or data rate that can be supported in that system. You also need to look at what is the actual practical data rate that can be achieved. And based on that, if you have the limit in terms of the practical data rate that can be achieved, then you can also look at what is the most practical data rate that will provide a particular quality of service. So you realize the data rate will keep reducing because if you want to have an acceptable QoS, then you have to have a limit to the number of users. If you do not care about the QoS, then the data rates that can be achieved can be slightly higher, but we can never get to the theoretical limit, for example. Now, in availability, we could have the capacity of the system as one of them. From an ICS point of view, probably the total number of connections a web server can support, assuming clients need to get some resources from the web server, then that will define the capacity of the system. And if we exceed this capacity, then the system is no longer available to some of the authorized users. Yeah? So other than capacity, we have elements such as fault tolerance, scalability. Yeah? What else? Redundancy. Yeah? So we have some elements that revolve around availability, and they don't just focus on the capacity, but also what happens in case maybe a single node fails in a multi-node environment. Yeah? Okay. So we have the three components: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, I am not sure whether you mentioned this in your previous class, but it is not practically possible to achieve equal levels of confidentiality, integrity, and availability in any system. Did you mention that aspect? Yeah. And if you did, why is that the case? Yes, Michael. Michael Boyle.
When you're looking at them, we mentioned them more from a point of encryption, of which there's none that could achieve all the three at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'd have something like, let me get my thoughts first.
Okay. So anyone? Is it possible to achieve equal measures of confidentiality, integrity, and availability in a system or application from a practical point of view. Yes, Solomon, you said no, it's not possible. Why not?
Using confidentiality and availability, we'll be having information available, but there'll be restrictions to certain categories of people that you want people to access the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
But don't you think availability is limited to people who are authorized to access the data?
Okay, let me repeat my point. Like you have data, let's say, for example, in a site, but not all the data will be available to all sorts of people. There'll be administrators who will be having access to some point of data, and normal users who can access the data that you want them to access.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Yes, Anthony Kivai.
Okay, so I think it's not possible to achieve equal levels of both of like all the three pillars because some of them might conflict with each other. For example, when you're trying to achieve integrity and availability, I think it might conflict, let's say, in the point of your system has different services that is offering to people. So when you're trying to make it more secure, the data more secure, it might limit, like you might be forced to limit the availability, maybe in terms of the quick access to the data and everything. Like it will conflict with each other. You can't be able to ensure both maximum integrity and availability. I forgot the example, but yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. I hope the rest of the class does as well. Yes, Alan.
Okay. My point is more or less like Solomon's, where that availability and confidentiality would clash. It's making data more available would risk the data that is not supposed to be accessed by those who are authorized. It would, some people, those who are not authorized may access the data that should be confidential. Sorry, I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Waweru, thank you.
Yeah, so I think my points are the same. However, I'll structure it a bit differently. So I'll look at it in terms of like a comparative analysis between centralized systems and decentralized systems. So for a centralized system, you will have a high confidentiality, whereby you can hide data easily, have user access, so on and so forth. And however, for integrity, it's a centralized system. So you have other people have no say in what the admin does with the data. So they can change it however they like. And for availability, there shall be availability because, of course, this is considering that there is fault tolerance and redundancy if we're considering a cloud system. Now, when we go to decentralized systems, you have, for confidentiality, since let's look at the blockchain, whereby you have ledgers that are distributed among many people. There's not much confidentiality, whereby people can see what transactions have happened. So they know you did this, you did that. So there's low confidentiality. However, for integrity, on the blockchain, you can't really change or modify the blockchain unless everyone agrees upon it. Most people agree upon it. So you can't modify the data on the blockchain. And for availability, since as long as you have more than one node, the data is available. So in order to make sure the data is not available, you'd have to take out all the nodes on the network, which is practically not possible. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me take Victor Mirana's answer first before I look at something in that regard.
Okay, so for me, I think it's not possible to balance out the three. When you think of a process like confirming a payment, so in that case, you will have to compromise on either confidentiality or availability, because as the payment is being processed, one of the parties will not be in a position to know the status of the payment. For example, if I'm the customer and I made the payment and my bank gave me a confirmation, it might take some time before the admin on the other side to get the same message. So in terms of, I feel like in terms of availability, there's some compromise there.
Okay. Okay, so you can probably get rid of the feel like and probably use a think like so that it's a bit more objective.
Okay, noted. Noted.
Okay. So yes, practically not possible because if you have one particular system or application and you want to do or to have mechanisms to achieve or to enforce all these components, then you will not be able to achieve all of them. If you do, say, very strong encryption mechanisms for confidentiality, then it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of processing power to actually decrypt this information, even for the authorized users. So if you're doing very, very strong encryption algorithms, then it's going to take a lot of time, even for the valid user to decrypt the information, which to some level affects the availability of the data for this particular user. The data will be much, much more secure if you look at it from a confidentiality point of view. If you have, say, message authentication codes for better integrity, so that you have to be authorized to change this data, then if I lose the codes, then I cannot access the data. Yeah? The availability is also compromised. So in most organizations, you will need to look at the two most important components that you need to, or that are most important in your enterprise. For example, if you look at, say, the AMS system, normally as a student, you already don't have rights to change, yes? Your data there is only available to you, yeah? But you should be able to access the data whenever you can. Yeah? So in such a system, then we will focus more on confidentiality and availability, and the integrity will be more or less making sure that no one has access, as long as their student access to modify the data. Yeah? If you had to look at it from maybe a research point of view in a university, then in that case, confidentiality is not as important, because if you want to foster an environment of sharing knowledge, then in that case, we do not want to hide the knowledge. Yeah? We only worry about how trustworthy the information is. So I will not expect, say, you in fourth year to consider, well, normally in subabnormal cases you will, normally to consider maybe an assignment that was done by a first-year student. Yeah? I will question the integrity of the data based on the knowledge that they have at that point. Yeah? Assuming all factors are held constant. In some cases, you might have variations of knowledge. But in this case, the content of the research is more important than hiding the research, especially if the idea is to foster learning. Yeah? If you want to focus on an environment where the information is very confidential and the integrity also has to be maintained, then what you'll have to do is you will need to limit who can access the data. You probably have to go to a particular individual for you to get data, which means you will have high confidentiality and high integrity, but very little availability. Yeah? Now, if you are in an organization where you have protocols to access data, yeah, and for you to access data, you probably need to be given permissions. And every time you need to access data that was probably not in your domain of access, then you might need a couple of authorizations from different individuals so that you can have access to the data. So in that case, you waiting for the approvals to be done is what will be the compromise to availability. Yeah. Amani, I see a question from you. If I haven't answered it, then you can probably help me understand what the question is.
I now understand what you mean.
Okay,
it's clear.
Okay. So none of your answers were wrong. The idea is that you always need to pick what is most vital in that particular scenario, in that enterprise, in that organization. Yeah. So you cannot achieve very high levels of all the three. At the end of the day, you will need to compromise one. Yeah. So depending on the environment you're working in, then you can pick any of them. Yeah, any two. Yeah. Now, someone mentioned something on the cloud environment and a distributed environment, and maybe I can give you something to go and read about. So you can look at a concept called CAP theory, and it's the same even in a distributed environment. Yeah? If you have a distributed environment and you have information shared across multiple nodes, then you will always have integrity issues, because if it's mirrored data, then it means this information, if information is modified on one particular node, then the information or the updates have to cascade throughout the other nodes. Yeah. So what if I am accessing data before the updates are implemented? Yeah? If I'm not doing mirroring, I am doing clusters, then it means the information is not complete unless I have a look at it from a holistic point of view. Yeah? And then the final bit is what mechanism will you use to cascade your updates, and how often will you do that? So you can look at CAP theory, which is different from this security component, and looks at some of the challenges you will have in a distributed environment, in as much as it provides probably a bit more scaling. Yeah? So there are different frameworks for security, and different frameworks consider other additional components. Yeah. So we have authenticity, we have accountability, we have assurance, we have non-repudiation, we have multiple other components. Yeah. Now, so all this will revolve around the other three. Yeah. They will have elements of the other three components that we've mentioned. Yeah. Yes, Waweru, your hand is still up. I presume you have a question? Sorry?
I don't. It was I left it.
Okay. So we have accountability, which is the ability to trace an event or an action to a particular entity. Yeah? So part of having some levels of access control is having some level of audit, which is a log of who did what in the system. Yeah? Authenticity, which is an element mostly focusing on integrity, focuses on the genuineness of either the data, the source of data, or the process that is accessing or modifying the data. Yeah? Then we have assurance, which is mostly a relative point of view. Yeah? It is a guarantee that stakeholders of a system or an application have that the security of the system is guaranteed. So security in terms of confidentiality, integrity, availability, audit, and so on. Yeah? So it's how safe the users think they are while using a system or an application. Yeah? So because it's not very objective, we normally have multiple ways to try and quantify or to try and guarantee this assurance. Yeah? So you end up having scenarios where an organization follows particular frameworks. A programmer follows a particular or particular best practices while coming up with a particular solution. Yeah? We have probably predefined test cases and test cycles for applications and systems, just so that we can probably look at weaknesses and vulnerabilities and potential threats that we could have in that system. Yeah? So assurance is based on these certifications, best practices, standards and frameworks that more or less govern how we look at things from the system or the application point of view. Yeah? Okay. So assurance is more or less guaranteeing that all the other components are achieved. Yeah? Now, we have some concepts that we cannot run away from when we look at security and design. And before we even mention them, we've looked at information system security. And the design bit, which I forgot to mention, is not just focusing on these elements of security, but how relevant they are in an enterprise or an organization. Yeah? See, in any organization or enterprise, you cannot run away from the business elements of the enterprise. Yeah? So in some cases, you will have a scenario where you have to choose probably a mechanism X over a mechanism Y, simply because the organization cannot afford or cannot support both mechanisms. So how do they choose these mechanisms? Okay. Number two, if they were looking at security in that enterprise, what other elements of the enterprise will they consider so that they have what we call a defense in-depth approach? Security is not an additional component that was brought in, but a component that was considered from the word go. So the idea behind information systems security design is to look at how you can incorporate security in all these elements, in all these mechanisms. So from the policy level to enforcement and to the cycle where it informs the next set of threats that will still be on the table, considering we still have measures in place. Okay? Now, I will start with this concept, and I will start with a question. Yeah? What is the difference between vulnerabilities, threats, and attacks? What is the difference between an attack, a vulnerability, and a threat? Wandawi Kari Joshua.
A vulnerability I can say is a weakness in the system that can be exploited.
Okay.
While a threat is, I'd say, a form of something like sabotage, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
An attack?
Attack is like an attempt now to alter or destroy or to gain unauthorized access into the system.
Okay. Yes, Rebecca.
I think that attack is like an active breach of a system. For instance, when someone is like actively monitoring you, or when someone is changing information like on a site or something of the sort. And then a vulnerability, in my opinion, is like a potential weakness that can be exploited to basically exploit a system and to launch an attack. For instance, like something like one step, something that like a login that doesn't have two-step verification. That's a vulnerability that can be attacked by a hacker. And I think a threat is something that exists within a system that is not causing any harm, but can potentially cause harm. Like for instance, using an app that has access to all the information on your phone. It's not really doing anything bad, but if anything were to happen, or if someone wanted to use it for harm or to monitor you or take your data, they very easily could. That's my opinion.
Okay. Wole Joseph.
I think vulnerabilities are the weaknesses that are in the system. And then a threat would be vulnerability is a weakness, that makes a threat possible. So a threat would be the exact, how do I put it? What actually takes advantage of a vulnerability? Like let's say there's a backdoor here. The threat is the occurrence or the bad thing that can happen because of that vulnerability. And then an attack would be the carrying out of a threat.
Okay. Peter Ukiru. What do you think?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think just as the others have said, I think a threat is something which can potentially cause harm. Like it does not cause harm at the moment, but in the long run it might turn out to be harmful to your files.
Okay, so yes, mostly what you've all mentioned. So an existing weakness in a system is a vulnerability. anything that can be exploited. We normally have so many vulnerabilities in almost all systems. We have unpatched things that will always be there. Now, the potential of a threat agent or of an agent to actually exploit the vulnerability is what a threat is. So the threat is that potential to exploit a vulnerability. And an attack is an actual exploitation of the vulnerability. So when you have a particular agent exploiting a particular vulnerability in an asset, then we have an attack. So all this revolve around assets. Now, enterprises will have different assets. They will have hardware-based assets. They will have application assets. They will have users as assets. They will have the network as an asset. Well, the network is more or less hardware and applications, but all these are assets. Now, assets have weaknesses, and that is where vulnerability is coming. So as long as we have a vulnerability, we will always have threats. We will always have the likelihood of an exploitation. And in some cases, we can have an actual attack. Then we have risk. Sometimes we can refer to it as exposure. Sometimes they can be a bit different. And risk will be if an attack was actualized. If a threat was actualized, if we had an attack, then how much loss do we expect to have? Now, when we are making security decisions, especially from a return on investment point of view, then we have to look at what is the risk, what is the amount of loss that we are going to have if this attack was successful, or if this attack was carried out. So if we have a couple of vulnerabilities and we had attacks for all these vulnerabilities, the one that results in the highest amount of loss, then that will probably be the first thing we should look at. So the idea is to have countermeasures based on the risk that we have in these assets. So assets will have vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities will be exploited, and we will have exposure. So if we quantify this exposure, then we will have risk. Then based on the risk, we will have countermeasures, which are procedures or techniques that we can have to try and fix these vulnerabilities. And then after that, we can always have a cycle. So can a threat be something internal? Yes, but we cannot look at threats as internal or external, because the threat is simply the potential. It's a chance event. Do we have any probability that we could have an attack? Now, if the agent is internal, then we have an attack that is insider-based, is internal. If the agent is external to the system, then we can have external attacks. And no, we cannot have a system that is completely free of vulnerabilities. None that I can think of. But I still don't think we can have a system that is free of vulnerabilities. We've had systems that are completely air-gapped, systems that are not connected to anything. And we've still had scenarios where people have compromised these systems, and these people are external to the system. So we can we cannot really make a system be devoid of vulnerabilities at all. We cannot really get rid of vulnerabilities completely. So this diagram here tries to show the relationship between these components that we've been discussing. Now, before we look at these impact levels, I will want us to look at a couple of things. Attack surfaces, and then policies and assumptions. But maybe we can take a 7 minutes break, then we can continue.
7 hours later.
Okay, so we can look at attack surfaces, and when we look at surfaces, we are simply looking at what are some of the categorization of assets that an enterprise can have, such that we can have sets of mechanisms to try and protect these categories of assets. So, so we have 3 surfaces. We could easily have 4. We can have the network surface, we can have the application surface, we can have the human surface, and we can have the hardware surface as well. So we could have vulnerabilities on switch operating systems, vulnerabilities on the functionality of routers and switches. So we could have attacks that focus on intermediary devices or network devices whose role is to propagate data from point A to point B. Yeah? So we could have attacks that focus on the network. Yeah? So we could have people listening to conversations across network media. We could have people having malicious access points that mirror authentic access points. Yeah? We could have attacks that focus on an application, the operating system, a particular user-based software. We could have attacks based on a particular mobile app. So if we have that kind of scenario, then the target is a particular application, and in that case we have a software-based surface. Yeah? So having correct settings, recent updates, security patches for applications will be some of the mechanisms that will be effective in software-based attacks. Yeah? We could also have a defense in depth approach such that we have multiple layers of security before you get to the actual application. Yeah? And these layers of security should not work against each other, but should complement each other. Yeah? So we have such frameworks as the defense in depth approach, or the onion model, or the network security model that more or less works or defines measures in the same manner as the OSI model. Yeah? Then we have the hardware surface, which in most cases is limited or is secured by physical security mechanisms. Yeah? Because in most cases, for you to get to the hardware, then you have to get to them physically. So we have probably a combination of both physical and logical security measures. Yeah? Because in some cases, I might not be able to access the data, but given time and the hardware, then I can find ways to probably access this data, despite having very good measures to protect applications, operating system, and data. Yeah? And finally, we have the human surface, which in most cases is the weakest link in information security. And the idea behind it is to simply either trick the user or make the user more or less complacent in these security mechanisms. Yeah? So we have easily this for attack surfaces. Yeah? Then we have perspectives that you can have when looking at an enterprise and the security in that enterprise. And what you cannot run away from is the policies that are defined for security aspects. Yeah? So, so two things that go hand in hand is policies and mechanisms. Yeah? So in any enterprise, you will have, of course, from your other units, you will have different levels of management, and based on different levels, you will have policies defined for different levels of users. Now, in terms of security, we still have these policies. Yeah? We have rules that say that a student cannot access maybe A, B, and C. A student should be able to access C, D, and E from wherever they are, but they cannot access probably H from a location that is away from the organization. Okay? So we have different rules or policy documents that define what can be and what cannot be done. Okay? So a policy, especially in terms of security, is exactly that. It's a document that defines what is allowed and what is not allowed in an enterprise with regards to a particular application or system. Okay? So there is normally a couple of assumptions that we will have in relation to these policies. Okay? See, when you have policies, you must have some basis for the policy. For example, when you say every user who logs into this online class must have registered, must have probably a username and password combination. Okay? That is the policy. But the assumption of the policy is the username and password combination actually provides security for the user and for the application. Okay? And that they more or less provide absolute security. Okay? Because if we question the strength of this username password combination as a source of security or as a mechanism for security, then we can never agree on what we will have on the policy, because we will not have a mechanism that we can put in place, because all mechanisms are not absolute. They cannot provide 100% security. So we normally have axioms that are basis for policies and for mechanisms, and they are more or less assumptions. Okay? A mechanism is a procedure or a tool or a technique that is applied to enforce the policy. So if we have policies that define who can access data, then we can have an encryption mechanism to try and limit who can view this data. Yeah? So the policy is what defines what is acceptable, and the mechanism is what enforces the policy. Yeah? So any examples of policies and mechanisms that you've come across within or without Strathmore University? Any suggestions of policies and mechanisms that you might have come across? You can go further and discredit these policies or mechanisms if you think they are not effective. But for now, just a policy and a mechanism will suffice. Yes, Mirano.
Okay, so in an example of an e-commerce site, vendors are only allowed to upload the products, but for them to be approved, there's a process. It's a manual process. So the company's policy is that your product will be approved in 48 hours.
Okay.
It's like, I think the mechanism behind it is now the administrator being able to review that product and then getting back to the customer if there's anything to be changed, or the vendor, sorry, if there's anything to be changed. and then once it's approved, then I guess that process is done. The process of product uploading.
Okay. Yes, Cyril.
A good example, I think it should be it's the example of Strabno while using the network. In the labs, you find that there's a file that's set. For example, there's a rule where you can't access any gambling sites and also movie sites. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the policy and what is the mechanism?
The policy is for the gambling sites. The policy is you cannot access sites that are gambling, and then the mechanism, I think it's a firewall basically.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, Julie. Julie, you?
Hi.
Hello.
I think an example is in some of the organizations, you can't access specific rooms such as the server room. And the mechanism that they use maybe is putting a biometric system that verifies the people who enter into the server room.
Okay. Yes, Wabero.
So for my example, it would be like for many social media platforms you have today, like for example, Twitter, they have no bullying policies, no spreading fake news. And so that's their policy. Don't bully, don't cyberbully, don't spread fake news. And the mechanism for people who break those rules is that their accounts are either suspended or banned from the system.
Okay. Very true. Yes, Philip.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Philip.
For example, Strathmore has a policy for the dress code where you can only wear official attire, and the mechanism is the fashion codes that are put in place at different entrances.
Okay, that's true. The online classes are helping you bypass the policy, yes? Yes, Vivian.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have multiple policies. Yes, we can have policies that probably limit access to particular sites, particular social media platforms, and we can have mechanisms to enforce them. So in that case, we can have predefined access control lists or predefined rules on firewalls or unified threat management applications to try and drop any connections or any transactions to these prohibited sites. Yeah? We could also have rooms that are prohibited, and we can have access control measures. So we could have biometric systems or key fobs or access cards that only are only owned by people who should be able to access these rooms. Yeah? So we can have these policies and mechanisms in different application areas in different enterprises or organizations. Yeah? Then we can look at the mechanisms that we can have in place for these policies And the idea behind these mechanisms is to try and do any of these three goals. Yeah. So we have mechanisms that are there to prevent access to data, prevent attacks, more or less prevent any undesirable activities. Yeah? Then we can have mechanisms that focus on detection, and we can also have mechanisms that focus on recovery and restoration. Now, before we look at any other thing, are there scenarios where we will prioritize prevention over detection and restoration? Are there scenarios where prevention of any undesirable activities is a bit more preferable over detecting them or recovery and restoration? So we want to have prevention as the goal over the other two. Yes, Kesley.
Okay, so I'll give an example in banking or financial organization.
Okay.
They prefer to like prevent an incident where they end up losing their money than actually detecting it later when it's actually happened. It's much more safer for them in that scenario.
Okay, that's true. George, Moniki?
So for my example, I would say in the current pandemic, they prefer prevention since they want us to stay at home rather than detection and recovery, since when they're detecting, they might find too many people have, like, let's say, the disease, so it might be even hard to give out medication, or and it might even cause a higher impact on maybe on the economy or something. Yeah.
Okay. An example on InfoSec would be a bit more preferable, but it's a valid point of view. Yes, Alan.
I'd give my example with the Strathmore information system, where if you want to prevent spam or unwanted data at all, it's better off if you block off sites where they may originate from, like pirating and gambling sites, than allowing them and prevent working towards recovering them later. Yeah,
that's true. Yes, Cyril.
I think when dealing with crucial user data, for example, passwords, let's say, for example, your password for your emails, and also when you're in the online marketing tools, for example, not online marketing, but the online shops like Jumia, where you can pay with your cards, or also Netflix, where your card details, you find that such data is crucial to actually prevent access to it. Yeah.
Okay. Rebecca?
I think like someone mentioned about money being stolen. I think that's definitely like more important to prevent it, or even if it's like the Sony hack, if it's a movie being released, there's no way you're gonna take it back, right? So you have to just prevent it from the word go before, like, especially when the potential damage is going to be major.
Okay. Yes, Peter Mwava.
Yeah, so sorry for the interruption. Okay, my point was you will prefer prevention in a system whereby you consider a cost-effective system, and the cost-effective system will by where detection will maybe be incur more costs trying to detect an attack, and in a system whereby maybe you don't need of delay information, accessing information, whereby the recovery and restoration will take a little bit more time than to access the information that maybe had been attacked. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Michael.
I come to the view that almost always it's better to first prevent before going for the others. So I think it's always for every system you prevent first.
Okay. Yes, Austin.
I think it would be better to put more emphasis at the detection level, since earlier on we had said that prevention can't be 100% always. There have to be a vulnerability somewhere. So on my case, I think detection would be better.
Okay. So the question is not which is better. The question was examples where you will prefer prevention over detection. But in that case, what are some of the scenarios where you will prefer detection over prevention and recovery? Are there any scenarios where detection is a bit more preferable over the other two?
No, I'm not saying detection is more preferable. You still need for prevention and recovery, but detection will be much easier to achieve.
Okay. Like in what scenario?
I don't have a specific example at the moment.
Okay, all right. So any scenarios where, of course, you can have multiple mechanisms. Yeah? You have mechanisms for prevention, detection, and recovery. Yeah? But in some cases, you might find that you probably want more of detection than prevention, yeah? Because that will be a bit more advantageous to your enterprise than having prevention mechanisms. You could also have a scenario where you prefer to have recovery and restoration as the goal of your mechanism as compared to the other two. So what are some of the scenarios where you will probably want to have more of detection than prevention? Can be anyone. Yes, Moses.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, maybe another scenario can be banking again in their systems. In case of attacks from malicious software, usually want to detect the attack, detect first, and then prevent it before it actually causes any harm in the system. So that can be an example.
Okay. Okay, if you had, if Strathmore was trying to set up a different system, let's assume that most of the attacks targeted at systems in Strathmore come from students or come from internal users, students and staff. Yeah? If that was the case, and we are trying to gather more information about these insider attacks, we could probably have a system that tries to establish signatures or modes of attacks that come from internal users. Yeah? So if we have honeypots or applications that are meant to track user activities, then we wouldn't want to stop them from accessing the honeypot. We would want them to access it, yeah? Such that we can tell the patterns and trends that they use to initiate the attacks. So if you have honeypots or information gathering segments of the network, then you wouldn't want to prevent potential attacks. You would want them to happen, just that the data that you have there is not important. It's just there to try and trick the users. So when the information is gathered, then you can do a bit more planning. You can be a bit more prepared for such trends and such signatures of attacks. So in the case where you have such things as honeypots, then you want more of detection than prevention. Yeah? Okay. Yes, Stacy. Stacy?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
An example of a system where I thought detection is more essential is for the anti-money laundering systems in banks, because the bank needs to set up as many preventive measures as they can to prevent money laundering, but at the same time, they need customers from being able to transfer money. So, the malicious people will find any way to try and get channels to launder the money. So it's easier to detect suspicious transactions, to label them as money laundering transactions rather than the prevention.
Yes, probably learn a bit more about these accounts as well. Okay, Anthony?
Okay, so my example is in data storage systems, in any system that's stored or in servers. I think as a system administrator, it would be like wise to prioritize recovery and restoration. And I don't think I think you would prioritize recovery and restoration, because you can't start like predicting all the scenarios where your data or the hardware can be damaged. So you have to make sure that the measures are in place to recover the data and to recover the data. So I think in that case you prioritize it.
Yeah, I actually think that is a very good example, because the point of having that storage server is to probably have a bit more availability. So you want to focus on having data available to all users. So we always have mechanisms for recovery and restoration. A bit of prevention, but we always endeavor to ensure that the data is available. Okay, fair enough. Solomon?
Okay, using the example of the coronavirus disease, like if you want to prevent the spread of the disease, you have to detect like the hotspot and how the spread is really going to occur before trying to prevent.
Anthony, you still have something to say?
No, I forgot to lower the hand.
Okay. Stacy, your mic is on. I presume you have something to say? Okay. So in the meantime, okay, that's okay. In the meantime, in the chat, you can send your admission numbers and your names, so that that suffices as your attendance, just in case I can't access the logs at some point. So any other scenarios where you will prioritize recovery and restoration over the other two? Any other scenarios where you will prioritize recovery and restoration? So in the case where you have organizations that that have bug bounties. They have they try to get different people, external people, to try and break into their systems. So you have bug bounties and fireworks across systems. In that case, what is being prioritized? Detection, prevention, or recovery? Hassan Kulthum.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
In the scenario, in the case where you have an organization that has bug bounties and fireworks, more or less individuals trying to break into their system, what goal is being prioritized? Detection, prevention, recovery, and restoration.
I would choose recovery and restoration, mostly because if it's an internal thing, most of the times they already have the credential to access the system, whether they have the upper hand to get into the system. So probably the organization should have like a backup of files and data regarding sensitive issues or so. Yeah.
Okay. Vanessa Chege, what do you think?
Well, for me, I think detection would be better, because if people are already trying to hack into your system, it means that there's a vulnerability that they've seen they can be able to expose. So it's better to detect this and be able to put in place countermeasures to correct the vulnerability. So I think detection would be better.
Okay. Yeah. That will be detection, because the idea is to try and get the weaknesses exposed. Yeah? So this should allow you to have measures in place to try and fix these loopholes. Yeah? For recovery and restoration, we have scenarios where you want to test your fault tolerance. You want to test probably your secondary servers or your backup controllers. So you will probably want to see what happens if your primary attachment points actually fail. Yeah? So we could have such scenarios where we have restoration and recovery as the goal of these measures. Yeah? So if the idea is to try and see whether your backup points or systems can kick in, then I think in that case you will prioritize recovery and restoration. Yeah? There was a question on car alarm systems, whether they fall under prevention, detection, or both. So the question you should ask yourself is, what is the idea behind the car alarm system? So if the alarm system is there to probably alert the user that there is an intruder or there is a person who's trying to steal the car, or trying to make sure that the person who's trying to steal the car will not be able to drive the car, then that's more or less prevention. Okay. So any questions, concerns? So I can take any questions. So where does the biometric system fall? Tara, Kadeni? If you had biometric systems as mechanisms to probably control access to rooms or data, where will they fall? Prevention, detection, or recovery?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Biometric systems are prevention techniques because they prevent unauthorized access into a system.
Okay. So someone asks if I can tell you how Strathmore manages recovery and restoration of AMS data. So I am not sure of what they are doing at the moment, but what I am certain about is most of the data is based on the Active Directory. So we have primary and secondary domain controllers. And of course, the only way to ensure recovery and restoration is having redundancies. So backup data, backups that are often offsite, what we will call either cold sites or warm sites or mirror sites. So Strath should have a mirror somewhere else. Yeah? At least last I checked. So the car alarm system can be a mixture of both prevention and detection. I do not see the detection bit, but of course I might be missing something, so you could probably justify why the detection bit. I still don't see a perspective where detection comes in. Okay, so I think we can stop there. Yes, Amani.
Okay, let me just ask on car prevention, car alarm system.
Yes.
How does it prevent theft? If you're not there to respond to the alarm, I'll just order one.
He will just?
I'll still take order one, even though the car alarm is on.
Okay.
If you're not there to respond.
Okay, it's a fair point, but the question will be, why do we have that car alarm there? If the car alarm is to make sure that the car as a unit is not stolen, then it will be a preventive measure, because the idea is to alert you. If you miss the alert, then the alert was still given to you anyway. Yeah? Now, you see, in detection, it means you still have access to your system, just that something is probably missing or something has been executed. Yeah? So if part of or a component of the car was stolen, then you will not need to detect, it will not be there. Yeah? But primarily, I will think the idea behind that car alarm system is to make sure the car is not stolen. Yeah? Or is not taken by someone who's not authorized. Yeah? So in that case, the alert is simply there to deter the user by bringing attention to the activity. Yeah? I still don't see that detection bit. Yeah? Yes, that's the only thing I see. Yes, Cyril.
I think the car alarm inclines more of a detection measure. Because, let's say, for example, in a system, when a hacker is trying to enter your system, if you have the detection mechanisms, you'll be able to detect him, even if he has not yet accessed the system. In the same way, the alarm is there to detect. It's for you. Now you yourself will come in as the prevention measure. If you hear the alarm, you go and prevent the theft. But if you don't hear it, the theft will happen.
Okay.
So I think the alarm is more of preventive, because it's more of detecting, because it does not prevent it does not prevent the action itself, but it warns you about what is about to happen.
Okay. Can you detect something that hasn't happened?
Okay, so let me, it's a tricky question, but let me put it in this perspective. By the thief actually starting the thief trying to steal from you, is in the process of the action. It has not yet been completed, but the action has started. So it's detecting the action, even if it has not yet actually been completed.
Okay. Macharia, maybe as a last comment so that I don't take a lot more of your time. Okay. Macharia and Isaac as the last people.
I would insist on a column being a detective measure, because it detects a threat for someone, say, who doesn't have, say, a key or something to the car. Something should be more like prevention will be, say, the cutout or steering lock or something. So it still insists on the car alarm
detection.
Yeah, being a detective measure.
Okay. Isaac, you had something to say?
Yeah, okay. For me, I feel like for the issue of the car alarm system, let's first establish why it's there. It's to alarm you as the owner of the car that someone wants to gain access to your car without you necessarily having your consent. So I generally feel like it's more of prevention, because before the person actually takes control over your vehicle, the alarm will already notify you. So I feel like it's more of a preventive measure than a detective measure.
Okay. Amani, you have 15 seconds.
This is Isaac. What is it preventing?
Sorry?
What is the alarm preventing if the action is not happening yet? It can't go off until the action starts to happen. So it's detecting, not preventing. It can't prevent you from what the car has.
Okay, so we can finish this discussion in the next class. In the meantime, let's think about this car alarm system. If there are different stages to this car alarm system, we can think about them. Then we can have a discussion as a recap to this class before we move on in the next class. Yeah?